This is the case of two sisters who were celebrating one of their birthdays just after lockdown, and then they were attacked. They had absolutely no reason to be attacked. They were just two women enjoying their time together. But this case does take place in a very rocky time for the Met Police. This case alone led to two constables being imprisoned. Disclaimers before we start are a must. This is a true story involving true people. It's true crime. So I do want you to share it and I do want you to comment on it. But as you do so, please do be sensitive. Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman were just two normal sisters. Bibaa was the oldest. She was born in 1974. She was 46 and she was living in Wembley, northwest London. She was a social worker for Buckinghamshire Council, and she was described by her family as being a passionate advocate for safeguarding vulnerable children and families. At only 5 foot tall but bursting with energy, she'd been dubbed the nickname Pocket Rocket. He said that she had the heart of a lion and a smile that would put Blackpool Illuminations to shame. Her dad was Herman Henry. He was a former boxer, and at some point later in Bibaa's life, I think it was early adulthood, her parents got a divorce. By 1992, her mom was to remarry. She married Christopher Smallman, and a few years later, Bibaa had a younger sister, Nicole Smallman. In 2020, at the age of 27, Nicole, who was a University of Westminster graduate, was living in Harrow, northwest London. To give you a bit more of a background of the type of family we're talking about here, their mother was Mina Smallman. She was the Church of England's first female archdeacon from a black or minority ethnic background. On the 6th of June 2020, during the slow release of the UK's first and biggest lockdown, their family reported both the sisters as missing. The night before, both the sisters, along with some friends, had been celebrating Bibaa's 46th birthday. They were doing so by having a picnic at Frayent County Park in Brent, northwest London. There was CCTV recordings of the sisters making their way into the park, ready for the picnic. After watching the sunset together, the celebration started to draw to an end. The friends started leaving just the two sisters in the park. Photographs from one of the sisters' phones showed that they're having a great time together. Just innocent fun. They were dancing, they were singing, they had some fairy lights they were playing with to take pictures. And the last picture was taken at 13 minutes past 1 in the early hours of Saturday the 6th of June 2020. However, at some point in the next 13 minutes, that harmless sisterly fun came to a horrific end. By 1:26, Bibaa's phone had been locked, and someone that didn't know the passcode was trying to access it. The person trying to access Bibaa's phone was Danyal Hussein, and it was completely by chance that he'd found Bibaa and Nicole. He was looking for someone, but he weren't looking for them. They had absolutely no idea who he was. And not only was he a stranger to them, at 1 o'clock in the morning, in a dark park, during a partial lockdown, his appearance was an unpleasant surprise to them. Both of the sisters died of stab wounds, but in all, their injuries were absolutely appalling. It's suspected that Bibaa died first. In total, she had 8 stab wounds, and she had absolutely no signs that she tried to fight back. Nicole then suffered 40 stab wounds and incisions. She did have wounds to her right hand and her left arm, which shows that she tried to fight Danyal off. Danyal didn't get away without any injuries though. He had a serious cut to his right hand. After murdering the two women, he then dragged them by the feet for 75 metres to some nearby bushes. The backs were covered in abrasions from being dragged. Once in the bushes, Danyal then positioned their bodies in an embrace. He stole their phones, and later on, data that was stored on the phones showed that he wandered around the park for a bit trying to access a phone, but he never managed it. So in defeat, he threw both the phones into a pond on the park. Before leaving, he gathered up the picnic items so no one would be attracted to his sight and see that there's obviously been a murderous attack. Danyal then went home back to his father's house, and he got there about 10 past 4 in the morning. He was apparently half-clothed, and he was covering his wounded hand with his jacket. At some point, I don't know when, he got rid of his bloodstained trousers, and they were never recovered. And he also got rid of the knives. So as I said, this is now the early hours of the 6th, and it's later on that day that the sisters were reported as missing. At first, the police showed very little, if any, interest at all, and the mom, Mina, says that that's due to racism. She claims that they've looked at Bibaa, that they've seen that she was a black woman from a council estate, and just wrote it off. But these two women were decent people, with decent friends. So on Sunday the 7th of June 2020, they were out in force looking for Bibaa and Nicole. Nicole's boyfriend Adam went to the site where they were last known to have been, and it wasn't far away that he found their bodies. Just think of what a horrible sight he must have encountered. His victim impact statement talks of the ongoing torment and the trauma and constantly being able to see that image. Now let's just hold up for a second. That is some unimaginable stuff there alone. You go out to find your partner and you find that. Just remember that they've been stabbed 48 times between them. This is not going to be just somebody looking peaceful. It's going to be an awful sight. And let's face it, the only reason that he's found them is because when they were reported missing, the police didn't instantly go to the site where they'd last been seen. It would be absolutely scarring. And Adam did say in his impact statement, "I will never be able to unsee what I saw." Once the bodies were found, the Met Police then searched the area. Now, one of the biggest things for me when I'm writing and researching a case is always a motive. It's always hard to think that there weren't a motive. And we never really find out what the motive is, because they always claim that they didn't do it, or diminish responsibility, I didn't know what I was thinking. But that really sticks to me. Why did the perpetrator do it? What was he thinking? What did they do and feel after? Are they so disconnected from human emotions? And like I said, we never really find out. But in this case we do. And we don't find out because Danyal came forward and told everybody, oh no, he dragged it all the way through court. But the police found out. They found out without a doubt what his motivation was. So let's get to the evidence, the proceedings and the court. Apparently after the murders, Danyal Hussein was completely nonchalant. There were absolutely nothing about him to suggest there was something wrong. It was completely normal, no anxiety, no distress. Life went on as normal. He did visit Northwick Park Hospital twice for the injury on his hand. While he was there, he lied to the staff. At one point, he told a doctor that he'd been jumped by a group of boys, and another time he said that he'd been mugged. The police found out that on Wednesday the 3rd of June 2020, just 2 full days before the murders, Danyal had ordered various items from Amazon. These items included a balaclava and 2 folding shovels. Later that day, he went to Asda in Colindale and purchased a knife block, which included a knife. That knife was found on the ground in the park. It had bloodstains all over it, as well as Nicole's DNA. Later that evening, on the 3rd, he went back to the same Asda store to buy some power tape. On Friday, the 5th of June 2020, so it's necessarily the same day as the murders, it's only separated by 1 hour after midnight, he went to Morrison's on Edgware Road to pick up some Amazon orders, the ones that we've just discussed. From there, he didn't go home. Oh no, he went straight to Freyant County Park. He put all of his Amazon items into his rucksack, which he was carrying when he walked into a park, and also while he walked into the park, he was wearing latex gloves. Now let's just hold up a second as well. He's not wearing gloves in the superstore. If you're on podcast you can't see, but there's just been a video up of him in Asda. He weren't wearing gloves then. But if someone were wearing latex gloves during that time, people have thought it a bit normal, just come out of lockdown, it might just be a bit cautious or whatever. So although we can easily say, well, that stands out a mile, at that time it's not necessarily so. What is quite obvious is this was very planned, very calculated and very deliberate, and he carried it out with precision. Then 10 or 11 days after the murder, on Tuesday the 6th of June 2020, he contacted his bank and reported some various transactions that he didn't recognise. These transactions, of course, were from the 3rd of June, and they were the Amazon orders, they were the Morrison's shopping, and they were the Asda shopping. He'd also purchased 3 lottery tickets, and he claimed that he didn't purchase them either, but they were later found by police in his bedroom at his mum's house. So it's plain to see here, he's lying to the bank, and all in all, it's just another step of him trying to cover his tracks. But the bank did issue him a new card. I also read on the 10 days after the killings, he'd spent up to £160 on lottery tickets and bets, but none of them really yielded any good results. The police at this point are still probing all the evidence. They're looking for as much DNA and as much clues as they possibly can. And they had found a lot of male DNA at the scene. Let's not forget, if nothing else, Danyal was bleeding a fair bit. It was about 23 days after the murders that Danyal Hussein had been matched for the DNA. So just before midnight on Tuesday the 30th of June, armed police arrived at his parents' house in Blackheath, South East London, and arrested Danyal when he answered the door. Here's the footage of that.
Someone's coming to the door. That's it. That's it. Mate, you're under arrest. Come out. Come out the address. Keep walking towards me. Keep walking towards me. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Hands on your head. Stay where you are. Face me. Hands on your head. Stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
Yeah, how do you want to do it? Give it to face the car. Yeah?
Yep.
From Uniform Zero, just confirm subject secure.
Well, depends on number 6. Could you just stay where you are for now? If police aren't with
I think I'll be
taser.
clear in a second.
Is there a mum in there?
Yeah, there is.
Okay, madam, if you come to the door for us, please. Okay.
Do you have any injuries?
Yeah.
Just the wrists from the cuffs?
No.
Oh. How did that happen? How did that happen?
Sorry.
How did that happen?
Oh, is this the interview?
That was a question. The injuries on your fingers. What happened there? Okay, don't worry.
I was getting a lot.
Don't. Any medical conditions? Asthma, diabetes, blood pressure, heart conditions, anything like that? No.
I thought this was an interview.
You don't need to be. The questions are asked to the gentleman that comes into custody.
So you're writing down what I just said.
It's alright, just listen to what
I thought you were supposed to do an official interview before asking me the actual question.
you will be interviewed later.
Recording the information.
And what this is at the time, it's you just being booked in. Okay. Any mental health issues? Any mental health issues?
No.
Have you ever tried to harm yourself? How do you feel right now?
I'm really shocked, to be honest. I'm really confused and scared. I don't know what's going on exactly.
I just realised there's something I didn't add to this, which I have read. Apparently, he said that he was really scared during police interviews. Anyway, the police searched his mum's house, and as they did, they found something very interesting in Danyal's room. It was an agreement with a demon. Inside, folded up, was some lottery tickets, the 3 lottery tickets that we'd previously bought. It was signed me, and then further signed with Danyal's name, written in his blood. Danyal had written this agreement as a bargain between him and somebody called the mighty King Lucifage Rockocale. King Lucifage Rothocale. Anyway, hard names aside, Danyal promised him that he'd perform a minimum of 6 sacrifices every 6 months as long as he were free and physically capable. He said that he'd only sacrifice women and he'd build a temple for the king. In return, the king would do a few things for him. Danyal had wrote in the agreement that he would win the Mega Millions super jackpot, receive fruitful rewards and wealth and power, and would never be suspected of any crimes by the police, and that the police would never know of any crimes that he had done or would do. Danyal didn't get what he tried to agree upon. His DNA was all over the crime scene. There was vast amounts of CCTV tracking him across London, and there were lots of other evidence to prove him guilty. Apparently, in another note found in his room, Danyal offered blood to Demon Queen Byleth in exchange for making a girl at school fall in love with him. Danyal Hussein grew up in Blackheath. He was born on the 10th of May 2002, making him the eldest of 4 siblings. He attended Thomas Tallis School, and he studied his A-levels at Oppington College. His parents split up while he was in his early teens, and it's said that Danyal had become a loner, and he'd quite often wander off. Interestingly enough, according to a neighbour, his dad were worried that he'd got mixed up into the wrong crowd. In October 2017, at the age of just 15, Danyal was referred to the government's counter-extremism programme, PREVENT. The referral came from his school, Thomas Tallis, and it related to materials that he'd accessed on the school computers, which included far-right propaganda. He was considered a person of concern and had to appear in front of a panel. This panel was for individuals at risk of being drawn into terrorism. He was discharged from the programme in May 2018. Quick maths, that's 7 months after his original referral. After his arrest for the murders of Bibaa and Nicole, his digital devices were searched by police, and they found that he'd still been searching that type of stuff up, as well as searching up satanic stuff. In fact, he'd even been active on an occult forum until hours before his arrest. Because Danyal was only 18 at the time of the murders, and he'd only just turned 19 before the trial, and unfortunately, life tariffs are only available to people who are 21 years old or older, the starting point for his sentence was 30 years. The aggregating factors for his sentencing were premeditation and planning, the personal gain as a motive, the time and location of the murders, the repeated attempts at concealment of evidence and deception, defiling both the women in death by moving them into the woods and positioning them together. There was also a separate offence of possession of a weapon in a public place, and that was reflected in his minimum term. With all that considered, the sentence was currently at 37 years. Then the mitigating factors were his age. He was only 18 at the time, and this was his first offence. He had no previous criminal record, which, let's just hold up right there. We've just talked about him going through his programme because of his ideologies, and we're saying that his mitigating factors is that he's got no history. All right, he's got no criminal record, but like, let's not say he ain't got an history. They didn't say that, I'm saying that. But still, I find that amazing that you can still get mitigation for no previous criminal record when you've been through that kind of programme. I'm not saying that you should have a criminal record for being in the programme, but to say that he still gets no previous criminal record as a mitigation is amazing to me. Anyway, his defence was that he didn't do it, he weren't there, I didn't write the agreement or anything, and because that was his stance, he didn't have the possibility of a psychiatric defence. However, the judge did commission an independent consultant forensic psychiatrist, and they confirmed that Danyal had a diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder, and the judge and the jury had been told about that during the trial. But he went on to say that that doesn't explain why he committed the offences or why he's refusing to acknowledge his offending. The doctor suggested that aspects of a mental illness may be present, or there may be some form of personality disorder. Alternatively, there may be a psychopathy, itself a difficult term to define. But none of these conditions is established. He puts these possibilities forward as areas to explore in an effort to explain the striking oddness, his words, of the offences. The judge determined that Danyal's culpability was high and not reduced by mental impairment or disorder. Although the judge did say, "I accept, however, that your ASD and the possibility of other compounding psychiatric diagnosis make you a person who may struggle in prison more than others might. That is something I take into account." Danyal Hussein showed no signs of remorse throughout his sentencing. I don't know if it was his sentencing or another part of the trial, but while waiting for the judge to arrive, Danyal was slumped back in his chair. At times, it even seemed like he was smirking. He then positioned his hands behind his head like he was just chilling out on a beach. At one point, he even started to play catch with his face mask. After a few minutes, he moved into like a squatted position on his chair, pulling his knees up to his chest. The hearing commenced when the judge arrived, and then half an hour later, it ceased for a 30-minute break. When Danyal was brought back to the courtroom, he turned his chair 90 degrees left, so it was facing the window, away from the judge. Everybody stood up for the judge's arrival, and she remarked, "I would ask you all to be seated, but I can see Mr. Hussein already is." She then made no other comments about his behaviour throughout court. She chose not to because she saw that he was clearly craving attention, and she weren't going to give him that. Danyal, by the way, did not stand as a witness. For the murder of Nicole Smallman, Danyal was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 35 years. For the murder of Bibaa Henry, again, Danyal was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 35 years, to be served concurrently. For possessing a knife in a public place, he was sentenced to 18 months detention in a young offenders institution, to be served concurrently. The judge then ordered the laptop, the iPad, the knife, and all the other paraphernalia found at the scene to be destroyed. It's believed that the reason Danyal didn't kill anybody else that night was because of a cut on his hand. It's really his fault that if he hadn't cut his finger so badly, if he hadn't cut his hand so badly, he would have gone on to kill more people that night. But this isn't over. There's a really disturbing part that I missed halfway through this case. Once Bibaa and Nicole's bodies had been found, the police obviously went down and cordoned off the scene. This is something they always do to preserve and collect evidence. But this time when they did so, 47-year-old Dennis Jaffer and 32-year-old Jamie Lewis were instructed to guard the scene. In the months following, it was discovered that while these two people were guarding the scene, protecting the scene, they took selfies with the dead bodies. Dennis Jaffer sent pictures to 3 friends and 2 colleagues. Jamie Lewis used Snapchat to superimpose his face on the picture of the bodies. He then shared it on WhatsApp, referring to the 2 sisters as dead birds. A further 6 officers were investigated for failing to either challenge or report this incident. The investigation has uncovered further alleged misconduct breaches of standards of professional behaviour for a small number of officers, which include honesty and integrity and equality and diversity. Both the officers pled guilty to misconduct in public office. Jamie Lewis was dismissed from the police. Dennis Jaffer was already resigned. Then in December 2021, they were both sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in jail. I'd just like to point out that these officers were working for the Met Police, and this is the same year that Sarah Everard went missing, was found, and then the police officer who kidnapped, raped and murdered her was also caught. He was also a Met Police officer. That's all I've got for you. And you know what? Culpability, diminished responsibility is something that always baffles me. I've discussed it in the comments below on other cases, but let me try and explain what I mean. So if they diagnose you with a mental illness, then you get less time because, well, suppose it weren't entirely your fault, you've got diminished responsibility, low culpability, you had a voice in your head or whatever, there you go, less time, not your fault. We know you did it, but it weren't your fault. Does that mean if you don't get a discount for low culpability, if you don't get diminished responsibility, does that mean you're of sound mind? Does that mean you're perfectly okay as a human being? Because I don't think this guy was in any way of a sound mind. I don't think Andrew Innes, the case from a couple of weeks ago, was in any way a sound mind. Now don't get it twisted, I'm not saying that these guys should have diminished responsibility and get less time. But it's something that never sits right with me. We say that you get diminished responsibility because there's something up with you mentally. But as far as I'm concerned, in order to kill 2 people for no other reason other than you think a demon's going to let you win the lottery, means that you've got something wrong in your head. Doesn't matter if there's a label we can put to it, this is not normal. And I think I quite often look at prison as like the naughty step. Right, you've murdered someone, oh, that's a really bad crime, so you can go into prison for 20 years, then you'll come out and you won't do it again because you'll be reformed. You can only come out if you've shown the parole board you're reformed. But I kind of go, can you really reform somebody that can quite happily go out and kill 2 people, then not have any remorse? Can you reform Andrew Innes? Luckily, this case is an example of diminished responsibility. But surely, from the cases I've covered, it seems like every other man, every other dog gets diminished responsibility. Surely true diminished responsibility should be very low. Should be a very rare outcome. Do you know what I mean? I really hope I ain't explained that wrong, because if I have, I'm going to look really bad. Let me know what you think down below. Until next week, guys,